Two children, 130 miles apart. They had never met, never shared a classroom, never breathed the same air. And in April of 2009, they were carrying the same brand new virus. Think about what that means for a second. If two strangers that far apart both have it, nobody handed it to them. It was already out there, already moving, and nobody in the United States knew. Here's how it started. On April 15, 2009, scientists at the Centers for Disease Control ran a sample from a 10-year-old boy in Southern California. The result came back as nothing. Not unclear, nothing. An influenza virus that matched no record they had. 2 days later, on April 17th, the second one surfaced. That's when the room went quiet, because this thing was a genuine chimera. Genes from swine flu, bird flu, and human flu, stitched into a combination that had never been found in any animal or any person anywhere on Earth. Brand new. Built from scratch, by chance. And then the calendar starts sprinting. April 21st, the CDC goes public. April 22nd, the Emergency Operations Center is switched on. April 23rd, 2 more infections turn up in Texas. And just like that, a local puzzle becomes a national emergency. April 25th, the World Health Organization declares a public health emergency of international concern. April 26th, the United States government follows, and antiviral medicine starts moving out of the federal stockpile. April 27th, a 23-month-old boy dies in a Houston hospital, the first person in America killed by this virus. He was not yet 2 years old. Now here's the part that made doctors' blood run cold. You know how the flu works. It takes the old and the frail. In a normal season, somewhere between 70 and 90% of flu deaths are people 65 and older. That's the pattern. That's always the pattern. This one flipped it upside down. Older Americans, it turned out, were partly shielded. Their immune systems had met something similar decades earlier, back when they were kids. Children and young adults had met nothing. They were wide open. Worldwide, roughly 80% of the deaths were in people under 65. So instead of nursing homes, it went hunting through classrooms, summer camps, college dorms, young families with a car seat in the back. On May 5th, 980 American schools shut their doors, sending 607,000 students home. By June 19th, every single state, plus the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands, had reported cases. All of it. On June 11th, the World Health Organization said the word out loud. Pandemic. The first one in 41 years. And it saved something especially cruel for pregnant women. They took a share of the severe cases and the deaths wildly out of proportion to their numbers. Healthy women in their 20s and 30s walking into emergency rooms with pneumonia and ending up on ventilators. Some of them delivered babies they never got to hold. So where was the vaccine? That's the whole tragedy right there. We knew how to make flu vaccine. We'd been doing it for decades. The problem was how. You grow it inside chicken eggs. It takes about 6 months. And there is no way on earth to make it go faster. 6 months. Against a virus that crossed a continent in 6 weeks. Watch the timeline and you can feel the gap opening. Clinical trials start July 22nd. The FDA approves 4 vaccines on September 15th. The first doses go into American arms on October 5th. Too late. The second wave was already on top of them. In the week ending October 24th, 48 of the 50 states reported widespread flu activity, the highest level of the entire pandemic. That same day, the president declared a national emergency so hospitals could throw out the rule book and put triage tents in their parking lots. And out front, people were standing in lines that wrapped around the block, only to be told the doses had run out. The first 100 million doses weren't available to order until December 18th, weeks after the peak. The wave had already come and gone. Here's the final accounting. Between April 12, 2009 and April 10, 2010, 60,800,000 Americans infected, 274,304 hospitalized, 12,469 dead. roughly 1,280 of them children. Worldwide, the estimate runs between 151,700 and 575,000 deaths in the first year alone. On August 11, 2010, the World Health Organization declared it over. And then America got serious about the one thing that had failed: speed. So the money went into making vaccine without chicken eggs. A cell-based vaccine approved in November 2012, a recombinant vaccine, no live virus involved at all, approved in January 2013. 3 federally backed manufacturing centers built for one job: surge production when the next one comes. The watching changed too. Every flu sample sent to the CDC now gets its complete genome read as step 1, not just the chosen few. Regional reference laboratories went up across the country. A tool was built to score any new animal flu virus for pandemic potential before it ever touches a human being, and a severity framework so the response gets sized to the actual threat instead of somebody's best guess. March 2013. Congress passes the Pandemic and All Hazards Preparedness Reauthorization Act, 2014. The United States helps launch the global health security agenda on one blunt principle: an outbreak anywhere is a threat everywhere. And the virus? It never left. That 2009 strain still comes around every winter. It's still in the shot you get at the pharmacy. Every one of those improvements was paid for in advance. 12,469 Americans didn't live to see a single one of them. It's the quietest disaster America gets. No siren, no funnel on the horizon, no wall of water down the street, just a cold rain falling on a night when the ground sits a few degrees below freezing. By morning it looks like a postcard, every branch in glass, kids taking pictures, and it can flatten an entire state. Here's the math nobody thinks about. Forecasters use a rule of thumb. About a half inch of ice adds roughly 500 pounds of dead weight to a single span of power line. Half an inch, 500 pounds. In late January of 2009, parts of northern Arkansas and western Kentucky didn't get a half inch. They got 2. It began on the evening of Monday, January 26th. Light freezing rain, turning to sleet, turning to snow, up to 6 inches across northern Kentucky and southern Indiana. Then Tuesday the 27th, it switched back to freezing rain, and it just kept going. All day, all night, layer on layer on layer. That's when the trees started coming down. Not branches, trees. Full-grown hardwoods snapping under their own frozen weight and dragging the power lines down with them. Then the poles. Then entire distribution networks, block by block, county by county. The National Weather Service offices in Paducah and Louisville would later call it the worst weather event of the decade for their regions. 1.3 million customers lost power from Texas to Maine. 609,000 homes and businesses in Kentucky alone, the largest outage in the history of the state, including 205,000 around Louisville. 300,000 more in Arkansas. Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, and Tennessee all took hits. And then the temperature dropped. Sit with that a second. No heat, no lights, no stove. Water treatment plants offline, so no safe water either. Gas lines running hours long because the pumps need electricity too. But here's the detail that changes everything. The phones died. Cell towers ran their batteries flat and went silent, one after another. Across western Kentucky, emergency officials couldn't reach the hardest-hit communities at all. For days, the only working links were radio and satellite phones. Which means nobody knew who was still alive out there. Not a guess. They had no way of knowing. January 28th. The federal government issues an emergency declaration for Kentucky. Governor Steve Beshear calls it the biggest natural disaster in modern Kentucky history. And then does something no Kentucky governor had ever done for a storm. He activates the entire Kentucky Army National Guard, plus roughly 325 Air Guardsmen. Around 5,000 8,000 troops, the largest call-up in state history. And their mission wasn't combat. It was knocking on doors. Teams moved through the western counties, cutting trees off roads, hauling generators, going house to house, just to find out who was still breathing. More than 200 shelters opened, taking in nearly 8,000 people. Over 100 counties declared states of emergency. On February 5th, the president signed a major disaster declaration. Some rural customers waited 10 days for the lights. Some waited weeks. Now the hard part. 65 people died across the country, 36 in Kentucky by the state's own count. And the thing that killed most of them wasn't the ice. It was trying to stay warm. They ran gasoline generators inside garages and enclosed porches, lit kerosene heaters in sealed rooms, and shut the doors to hold the heat in. Some brought charcoal grills indoors. Carbon monoxide has no color, no smell, and it doesn't wake you up. It makes you sleepy first. Whole families were found together, in houses that looked perfectly ordinary from the road. Others just froze. Shirley Fannin was 72, an Alzheimer's patient in Canonsburg, Kentucky. On the worst night of the storm, she got out of her house. They found her the next day, in her own driveway. That's the shape of this thing. There's no dramatic moment to point at. 65 separate quiet ones, in the dark, mostly among the old, the rural, and the people with nowhere else to go. So what actually came out of it? The carbon monoxide toll went to work on the generator industry. Public health teams documented exactly how and where people were poisoned, and that data fed a decade-long push that ended in a new safety standard for portable generators. Machines that shut themselves down automatically when carbon monoxide builds up, running far lower emission engines. States and cities tightened carbon monoxide alarm rules in homes, and never run it indoors became a line in every winter storm warning issued in this country. Kentucky rebuilt what broke. Federal mitigation money bought backup generators for water treatment plants, shelters, and nursing homes, so the next outage wouldn't automatically become a water crisis too. Utilities and rural cooperatives widened right-of-way clearing and rebuilt lines to carry ice loads that had folded the old ones flat. And they fixed the silence. Satellite gear, mobile command capability, interoperable radio, permanent now. Because a rescue force that can't talk to the people it's rescuing isn't a rescue force. It's 5,000 men driving around in the dark. Counties across the region started keeping registries of residents who need power for oxygen or dialysis. Somebody now knows which doors to knock on first. The ice comes back every winter. It always will. Next time your forecast says freezing rain instead of snow, understand that the second one is the dangerous word. 65 people paid for that checklist. Use it. Every pilot on Earth is trained for one moment above all others. The control column starts shaking in your hands. That's the airplane telling you it is about to stop flying. You push forward. That's it. That's the whole answer. It's the first thing you learn, and it is supposed to be the last thing you ever forget. On the night of February 12, 2009, 5 miles from the runway at Buffalo, a captain pulled back instead. Rewind 15 minutes, and everything looks perfectly ordinary. Flaps coming down, gear coming down, the end of a 53-minute hop from Newark on a snowy Thursday. 49 people aboard, and not one of them has any reason to look up from a book. The autopilot is flying the airplane, and the autopilot is quietly running out of airspeed. Colgan Air Flight 3407, operating under the Continental Connection name, a Bombardier Dash 8 Q400, a solid turboprop with a good record. 45 passengers in the cab, 2 pilots up front, 2 flight attendants in back, plus an off-duty pilot riding home. There was ice on the wings that night. Everybody assumed that was the story. It wasn't. Not even close. As the airplane slowed for landing, the speed bled off far below where it should have been, and the stick shaker fired. That last warning. Captain Marvin Renslow pulled back on the controls, not once, 3 times. When the stick pusher kicked in, the system that shoves the nose down automatically because it assumes the human has frozen, he overrode it. And First Officer Rebecca Shaw retracted the flaps, which deepened the stall instead of easing it. The airplane pitched up 31 degrees, rolled left, snapped hard right, and fell out of the sky. It came down on a house at 6038 Long Street in Clarence Center, New York, at 17 minutes past 10. Everyone aboard died. So did Douglas Walensky, 61 years old, sitting in his own living room. His wife and daughter got out of the burning house alive, 50 dead, and the wreckage barely spilled past the edge of one property. One of the passengers was Beverly Eckert. Her husband was killed in the World Trade Center on September 11th, and she'd spent every year since fighting for the families of the dead. 6 days before this flight, she'd been at the White House meeting with the president. She was flying to Buffalo to mark what would have been her husband's birthday and hand out a scholarship in his name. Now here's where it stops being a tragedy and starts being a scandal. Investigators went digging into who these two pilots actually were. What came back didn't describe two people, it described an entire industry. Captain Renslow, 47, had failed multiple check rides across his career, some before Colgan hired him, some after. Colgan didn't know the full history. Why? Because there was no reliable way for any airline in America to see a pilot's complete record, and he had never once put his hands on a stick pusher in training. He'd been told about it. He had never felt it. First Officer Shaw was 24. She lived near Seattle. She had crossed the entire country overnight, riding cargo flights to reach Newark, and you can hear her on the cockpit recording, sick with congestion. Her pay for the previous year came to about $16,000. Neither of them had a hotel that night. The captain slept in a crew lounge. And in the final minutes, below 10,000 feet, where the rules demand silence about anything except flying the airplane, the two of them were deep in conversation about their careers and how little experience they had with ice. Investigators described it as one-sided, the captain talking, the flight turning into background noise. On February 2, 2010, the National Transportation Safety Board delivered its verdict. Probable cause, the captain's inappropriate response to the stick shaker. Contributing, failure to monitor airspeed, sterile cockpit rules broken, the captain's failure to manage the flight, and Colgan's own inadequate procedures. ICE didn't do this. Two exhausted, underpaid, undertrained people in a dark cockpit did. And then something happened that almost never happens. The families refused to go home. They organized as the families of Continental Flight 3407, and they went to Washington. Again and again. Dozens of trips, hearings, hallways, offices. They weren't after a settlement. They wanted the law rewritten. They got it. August 1, 2010, the President signs the Airline Safety and Federal Aviation Administration Extension Act. Look at what it actually did. A first officer could no longer walk into an airline cockpit with 250 flight hours. Now you need an airline transport pilot certificate, 1,500 hours. That took effect August 1, 2013. 1,000 hours flying for an airline before anyone hands you the left seat. Fatigue rules got torn up and rebuilt on actual sleep science, replacing limits that were decades old. 10 hours of rest between duty periods, a real 8-hour opportunity to sleep. In force from January of 2014. Stall and upset recovery training became mandatory. Hands on the controls in a simulator, feeling it instead of reading about it. Airlines had to build remedial programs for pilots who fail a check ride instead of quietly passing them down the line. And a national pilot records database went up, so no airline could ever again hire a captain without seeing every failure in his file. Here's the number that matters. Flight 3407 was the last fatal crash of a scheduled United States passenger airline for nearly 16 years. Billions of passengers, not one. 50 people died 5 miles from the runway. Their families spent the next decade making sure you don't. The warning worked. It reached American Samoa about 8 minutes before the water did. 8 minutes. And 34 Americans still died. Sit with that, because the obvious conclusion is wrong. That wasn't a failure. That was close to the fastest a warning system on this planet can physically move. Investigators went back afterward and ran the numbers, even if the alert had gone out 2 minutes after the earthquake. 2. It's doubtful it would have reached the villages in time to matter. Some waves are just too close to outrun by radio. Tuesday, September 29, 2009. 6:48 in the morning, Samoa Standard Time. About 120 miles south of Samoa, the seafloor tore open near the Tonga Trench. Magnitude 8.1. And then a second great earthquake within 2 or 3 minutes of the first. Scientists call that a doublet. It's rare enough that to this day, nobody can say with certainty which one came first. On the islands, the shaking ran for at least a minute. Some people say more than 2. Long enough to know this wasn't normal. Long enough that anybody standing on that ground already had every scrap of information they needed. 10 to 20 minutes later, the ocean arrived. In American Samoa, scientists later measured water climbing about 38 feet above sea level and running 800 feet inland. Across the wider region, 72 feet. In Pago Pago Harbor, the wave came in through the town and took the parked cars out to sea with it. And the villages on the western end of Tutuila, Leon, Paloa, Amanave, weren't damaged. They were erased. Final count, 192 dead. 149 in Samoa, 34 in American Samoa, 9 on the small Tongan island of Niuato-Putapu. Damages past $200 million. Those 34 Americans make this the deadliest tsunami for American citizens so far this century, and most Americans have never heard of it. Weeks later, a team from the United States Geological Survey came to Tutuila to map the flooding before the evidence washed away. One of the scientists, walking the shoreline at Fagafue Bay, found a small shrine built on the bare concrete foundation of a house that no longer existed. Photographs of 3 girls, smiling, their sparkly shoes, their teddy bears. That's what the family had left to put there, so that's what they put there. Now here's the half of this story nobody tells. It should have been so much worse. And the reasons why are specific. The earthquake hit at 6:48 in the morning. People awake, but the workday not started, so the roads weren't jammed with commuters. The shaking itself did relatively little structural damage, which meant the escape routes stayed open. And on Tutuila, high ground is close. You don't have to run far. But the real reason? They'd practiced. September of 2009 had been designated Disaster Preparedness Month in American Samoa. Schools had evacuation plans written down. Communities had spent that summer and fall learning the natural warning signs: long shaking, the sea sucking backward, a roar coming off the water. So when the ground moved, thousands of people didn't wait for permission from anybody. They ran uphill. And then something beautifully low-tech happened. A local radio station, 93 KHJ, put out the tsunami warning. A second station picked it up and pushed it through the emergency alert system. In a village on the east side, the Pule Nuu, the village mayor, heard it on the radio and did the one thing that reaches every single house at once. He rang the church bell. That night, September 29th, President Obama declared a major disaster for the territory of American Samoa, unlocking federal money for housing, repairs, debris removal, and mitigation. FEMA stood up a joint field office on the island. But the islanders weren't sitting around waiting on Washington. They were out with chainsaws and machetes clearing roads before the federal teams even landed. One resident described the responders arriving, looking around at the cleared streets and asking where the damage was. So what actually changed? American Samoa rebuilt its warning system from nothing. An island-wide network of outdoor sirens, a hardened emergency alert system, text messaging straight to village leaders, churches, schools, and businesses, a 24-hour earthquake and tsunami watch capability, and a permanent emergency operations center. They mapped the water. Hazard zones and safe zones now carry physical signage, so a stranger standing on a beach can see where the line is and which way to run. Drills happen on a schedule instead of on good intentions. And they kept the bells. The National Weather Service and territorial officials built village bells formally into the warning chain, because a bell works when the power is out and the towers are dead. Self-activating weather radios went into homes and offices. In 2012, American Samoa earned tsunami-ready recognition from the National Weather Service. The science sped up too. New inundation modeling came online, pulling seismic data and deep ocean buoy readings together to forecast what a specific coastline will actually see, and to cancel alerts faster for the places that were never in danger. Every piece of that machinery is built for the faraway tsunami, the one that crosses an ocean and hands you hours. For the close one, there is no system. There's the ground under your feet, and that's it. So remember this, if you're ever near the ocean and an earthquake goes on longer than it should, that shaking is the warning. That's the whole alert. Not the siren, not your phone, not somebody on the radio confirming it. Don't grab anything. Don't go back. Go up. The deadliest attack ever carried out on an American military base wasn't carried out by a foreign enemy. It was a United States Army officer, a major, a psychiatrist, a man whose actual job was treating soldiers who came home from war with their minds in pieces. November 5, 2009, Fort Hood, Texas, at the time the largest active-duty armored post in the country. About 1:30 in the afternoon, and the place he picked tells you everything. The Soldier Readiness Processing Center is where troops go through the last steps before deploying. Medical checks, vaccinations, eye exams, paperwork. Rooms full of soldiers sitting in folding chairs waiting their turn to be called. By regulation, on a stateside post, not one of them is armed. He knew that. He worked there. Major Nadal Malik Hassan was 39 and had orders for Afghanistan. On August 1, 2009, he walked into a gun store in Colgan and bought a pistol. He fitted it with laser sights. On that Thursday afternoon, he sat down in the processing center like anybody else. Then, he stood up, shouted, and opened fire. Around 214 rounds, into unarmed people who had nowhere to go. 13 died. 12 soldiers and 1 civilian, Michael Grant Cahill, 62 years old. A physician assistant. Witnesses say Cahill went at the gunman with a chair, unarmed. 62. He charged anyway. He didn't survive it. And then there's Private First Class Francesca Velez, 21 years old, just back from Iraq, 3 months pregnant and about to be processed out of the Army because of it. That's the line she was standing in. Soldiers in that room heard what she screamed before she died. She wasn't calling for herself. She was calling for her baby. More than 30 others were wounded by gunfire, 43 in total wounded or injured. Now here's the number from the official review that nobody expects. 2 minutes and 40 seconds after the first 911 call, first responders were on scene. A minute and a half after that, the shooter was down. 2 civilian police sergeants did it. Kimberly Munley engaged him and got shot herself. Sergeant Mark Todd fired the rounds that ended it. Hassan lived, paralyzed from the chest down. 4 minutes and 10 seconds start to finish. That's it. In 4 minutes, he killed 13 people. On November 10th, the president stood at Fort Hood in front of 13 pairs of boots, 13 rifles, 13 helmets. And then the questions started. This is where it gets ugly. Hassan had not been invisible, not even close. Between December of 2008 and June of 2009, he exchanged emails with Anwar al-Awlaki, the American-born cleric who'd become a senior figure in al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Federal counterterrorism investigators saw some of those messages. They assessed them as consistent with his research work. They didn't act, and the Army was never told. Meanwhile, inside the military, colleagues had flagged concerns about his performance and about presentations he'd given to fellow physicians. He kept his security clearance. He kept moving up through the system. A Senate investigation released in February of 2011 put the whole failure right in its title. It called him a ticking time bomb. His court-martial opened August 6, 2013. He represented himself and offered no defense worth the name. August 23rd, convicted on 13 counts of premeditated murder and 32 counts of attempted premeditated murder. August 28th, sentenced to death. He sits on military death row at Fort Leavenworth, but the story doesn't end there, and this next part is what made the survivors angriest of all. The Department of Defense classified the attack as workplace violence. That wasn't a label. It was money and medicine. It meant the soldiers shot that day weren't eligible for the Purple Heart, and their injuries weren't treated as combat-related, which touches medical benefits, retirement compensation, all of it. Men still carrying bullets in their bodies were told, functionally, that they'd been in an office incident. They fought that for more than 5 years. It took an act of Congress to fix. Section 571 of the National Defense Authorization Act for 2015 widened Purple Heart eligibility to cover attacks inspired or motivated by a foreign terrorist organization. February 6, 2015, the Secretary of the Army approved the awards. April 10, 2015, at a ceremony at Fort Hood, the Purple Hearts were finally handed out, and Kimberly Munley and the family of Michael Cahill received the Defense of Freedom Medal. One survivor said the medal itself wasn't the point. The line it drew was terrorism on one side, workplace violence on the other. So what actually changed? November 20th, 2009, 15 days after the shooting, the Secretary of Defense stood up an independent panel led by a former Secretary of the Army and a former Chief of Naval Operations. Their report, Protecting the Force, Lessons from Fort Hood, hit his desk on January 15, 2010, and its central finding reframed the entire problem. American force protection had been built around the threat coming through the gate. It had almost nothing built around the threat already wearing the uniform. What followed was permanent. Formal insider threat programs and behavioral threat assessment written into how commands operate. New rules on how commanders document and act on concerns about a service member, instead of quietly passing him along at the next posting. Rebuilt information sharing between the FBI and the Defense Department, so a federal agency reading a soldier's communications can't just file it and move on. Every service ran its own follow-on review. The Bureau overhauled how counterterrorism leads travel between field offices. 13 people went to work that morning. Some were getting cleared to go to war. One was getting cleared to go home and have a baby. The system had the warning the whole time. It just had no way to hear it. Before he walked in the front door, he parked a car against the back one. Think about what that takes. Not rage. Rage doesn't plan. He had sat somewhere and worked out which way people would run, and then he closed that way first. Friday, April 3rd, 2009, 10:30 in the morning, Front Street, downtown Binghamton, New York. The American Civic Association helps immigrants and refugees settle in America. English classes, citizenship prep, paperwork. That morning, there was an English as a second language class running in a room just off the front lobby. Jiverly Ann Terry's Wong was 41, a naturalized American citizen born in Vietnam. He had taken classes in that same building. He came through the front door in a bulletproof vest and a bright green jacket, carrying 2 Beretta pistols he'd held a permit for since more than a decade earlier. He didn't say a word. He just started shooting. 2 receptionists went down first. One was killed. The other, 61-year-old Shirley DeLucia, took a bullet through the stomach and did something I still find hard to comprehend. She played dead. When he walked past her a second time, she kept her eyes shut and didn't move. And once he went into the classroom, she crawled under a desk and dialed 911. She stayed on that line for 39 minutes, shot in the abdomen, whispering, feeding police everything she could hear. In the classroom, 16 people were learning English. Wong fired 99 rounds, 88 from the 9mm, 11 from the .45. He killed the teacher and 12 of the 15 students. At 10:33, sirens started up outside. He shot himself in the head. 3 minutes. That's all it took. Now look at who died, because this is the part that hollows you out. Roberta King, 72, was the teacher, and she wasn't even supposed to be there. She was substituting for someone on vacation. Maria Zabnu, 60, a caseworker whose parents came from Ukraine, had the day off. The ACA called and said they were short-handed, so she came in. The students had come from everywhere. Almir Olimpio Alves, 43, a Brazilian with a doctorate in mathematics, visiting scholar at Binghamton University. Parveen Ali, 26, from northern Pakistan. 4 people from China, 2 from Haiti. Dolores Yagal, from the Philippines, who came to Binghamton to marry the man who had been her pen pal. And Layla Khalil, an Iraqi mother of 3. Her family survived car bombings near their house in Baghdad. They got out. They made it to Jordan. They made it to America. She was killed in an English class in upstate New York. 11 of the 13 dead were immigrants. They were in that room because they were trying to become Americans. And now the part that made people furious. Police were fast. 2 911 calls at 10:30. 4 officers dispatched inside 2 minutes, on scene by 10:33. But when they pulled up, the shooting had already stopped, and they had no way on earth to know why. Reloading? Hostages? An accomplice waiting? So they set a perimeter and waited for SWAT. SWAT went in at 11:13, 43 minutes after the first call. 10 survivors were walked out at noon, 10 more around 12:40, and some people stayed hidden in the basement boiler room for nearly 3 hours, not knowing if the gunman was still upstairs, not knowing if their husband or wife in the next room was alive. The district attorney addressed it head-on. Nobody was shot after police arrived, and based on the autopsies, no one who'd been hit could have been saved, even if officers had walked in during the first minute. That's true. It's also cold comfort when you've spent 3 hours in a basement. Days later, a letter turned up at a Syracuse television station, mailed by Wong on the morning of the attack. In it, he blamed police harassment and said he felt degraded because he couldn't speak English well. He killed 13 people over the exact thing that room existed to fix. So what came out of it? Here's where Binghamton did something you almost never see. Broome County commissioned a full after-action report, a hard, unflattering audit of its own performance, finished in September of 2009. Then, the mayor and the county executive released it publicly. All of it. Most places bury these documents. And it was blunt. No unified command was established. Police, fire, and EMS were never pulled into one structure. Radio systems couldn't talk across agencies. The county's mobile communications vehicle showed up and sat there, unused. Officers self-dispatched to the scene in numbers nobody could count. Victim services staff didn't know where they were supposed to stand. Red Cross workers had never once operated inside an active crime scene. And this one stings. There was no coroner available to sit with the families and explain what was happening to their dead. But the failure that says the most was language. The county had assistance pamphlets. In English. No way to translate anything quickly. So families who just lost someone were handed paper they couldn't read. Every one of those became an assignment with a name attached to it. Unified command training, interoperable radio planning, a family assistance center plan written into the county emergency operations plan, a death notification plan, a coroner liaison at the family center, incident command training for victim advocates, crime scene protocols for the Red Cross, self-dispatch policy, and emergency public information built out in 17 languages. There's one line in that report I can't get out of my head. A week before the shooting, the county ran a risk analysis. This scenario ranked so low it was, their words, almost off the radar. 13 people spent that Friday morning trying to learn a language. The county spent the next year learning 17. 3 acres. That's how big the station fire was at 7 o'clock on the morning of the second day. 3, maybe 4 acres. You could walk a circle around the whole thing in about 2 minutes. By the time it was declared contained, it had burned 160,577 acres, 251 square miles. The largest fire in the recorded history of Los Angeles County. Everything you need to understand about this disaster lives in the gap between those two numbers, and people have been fighting about that gap ever since. It started at 3:30 in the afternoon on Wednesday, August 26, 2009, in the Angeles National Forest just off the Angeles Crest Highway north of La Cañada Flint Ridge. The name comes from the Forest Service fire station near the point of ignition. And investigators worked it out fast. This one didn't start by accident. Somebody lit it. The ground it landed on was about the worst you could pick. Chaparral on steep canyon walls that hadn't burned in decades, packed with dead fuel, sitting directly above the northern edge of a metro area holding millions of people. Temperatures over 100, humidity in the single digits. Now, here's where it turns into a scandal. The Forest Service had not flown night firefighting missions since the 1970s. In 1977, a Forest Service helicopter and a Los Angeles County helicopter collided in the dark over the Angeles National Forest, and a pilot was killed. The agency stopped flying at night, and then never started again. So, on that first night, cool air, humidity climbing, winds lying down, the single best window you will ever get against a wildfire, the federal aircraft sat on the ground. Next morning, the fire was still small. By the day after, it wasn't. It ran up the canyons into country where no engine could follow, and from that point on, nobody was putting it out. They were just steering it. By Sunday, August 30th, day 4, it was climbing toward Mount Gleason above Acton, and there was a camp up there. Camp 16 was a Los Angeles County Fire Department conservation camp where inmate crews are trained as wildland firefighters. That afternoon, 55 inmates and 3 correction staff were still at that camp when the fire came for it. 2 men stayed to hold the ground. Fire Captain Tedmond Hall, 47, a 26-year veteran, and firefighter specialist Arnaldo Quinones, 35. Everybody called him Arnie. They ran a firing operation on the road below the camp, deliberately burning off the fuel so the main fire would arrive and find nothing left to eat. The fire hit the north end of the camp around 4:45 in the afternoon. 11 minutes later, radio contact with the firing team was gone. Their vehicle was found 800 feet down the ravine. All 55 inmates survived. All 3 staff survived. The 2 men who made that possible did not. Arnie Quinones had a pregnant wife at home. His daughter, Sophia Grace, was born on September 22, 2009. He never met her. The fire burned for weeks after that. It came for the Mount Wilson Observatory and the antenna farm that carries television and radio to most of Los Angeles. Crews saved both. Full containment came October 16, 2009, 52 days after ignition. Final tally? 160,000 acres, 89 homes destroyed, more than 200 structures gone, a suppression bill north of $90 million. But the mountain wasn't finished with people yet. Strip a steep slope of vegetation and the next hard rain doesn't soak in. It comes down as a wall of mud and boulders. In early February of 2010, storms hit the burn scar and pushed debris flows into the foothill neighborhoods below La Cañada Flint Ridge and La Crescenta, houses filled with mud. That's the second half of every major fire, and almost nobody films it. And the arson? Nobody has ever been charged. Which means, because 2 firefighters died up there, this isn't just an open arson case, it's an unsolved double homicide. So what changed? Congress came after it hard. Representative Adam Schiff convened a congressional panel in Pasadena, and lawmakers demanded a formal investigation by the Government Accountability Office. The findings were brutal. A review done for the Agriculture Department found that critical resources arrived late, partly because of an early decision to use federal personnel only, and pointed at a Forest Service letter sent to forest supervisors in August of 2009, urging them to hold down costs and use their own resources, instead of ordering from contractors or from state and local agencies. Forest Service officials insisted cost never touch the response. The GAO concluded the agency failed to use all potentially available aircraft early in the blaze, and that night-flying aircraft might have let them kill the fire on that first night. It also found the Forest Service had no strategy whatsoever for when night missions should be flown. A 35-year-old policy finally dragged into daylight. In August of 2012, the Forest Service reversed it. The decision followed a study that identified 130 separate safety measures needed to run night helicopter operations. By 2013, a specially equipped night-flying helicopter was under contract in Southern California, covering the Angeles, Cleveland, and San Bernardino National Forests, plus the southern half of the Los Padres. That unit has been flying for more than a decade now with a strong safety record. It worked well enough that senators later pushed for a second night flying team in Northern California. 3 acres at 7 in the morning, 251 square miles, 89 homes, and 2 men who stayed behind on a mountain so 58 other people could walk off it. There was a train sitting on the track, hundreds of people on board. And as far as the machine was concerned, it wasn't there. Empty track, clear ahead, nothing to see. So the system did exactly what it was built to do. It told the train coming up behind to keep its speed. Monday, June 22, 2009, 4:58 in the afternoon, dead center of the evening rush. Red line, on an above-ground stretch between Tacoma and Fort Totten in Washington, D.C. Train 214 was stopped, waiting for the train ahead to clear. Completely routine. Happens 100 times a day. Train 112 was inbound behind it, running under automatic control at around 44 miles an hour. And here's what had gone wrong. It's so small, it's almost insulting. One track circuit, a single piece of signaling equipment, logged as B2304, had stopped reliably detecting trains sitting on it. Stray electrical signals inside the modules were throwing false readings. Investigators later found that stopped train had been flickering in and out of the system's awareness like a bad light bulb, so the computer read empty track and commanded full speed into it. The operator of train 112 was Janice McMillan, 42 years old. She came around a curve, saw a train standing still in front of her, and threw the emergency brake. There wasn't enough distance. There was never going to be enough distance. And then the second failure landed on top of the first. The lead car of train 112 was a 1970s rail car, Metro's original fleet, the 1000 series. When it hit, it didn't crumple the way a modern car is engineered to. The rear car of the stopped train drove straight into it, like a knife into a sleeve. Investigators measured what was left. 63 feet of occupant survival space. Gone. 84% of the entire car. 9 people died, including Janice McMillan at the controls. Crews took 52 people to hospitals. Injury counts run as high as 80. It's still the deadliest accident in the history of the Washington Metro. Now here's the part that turns your stomach. Every link in this chain had already been flagged, in writing, years earlier. Start with the rail cars. A 2004 crash at Woodley Park had already shown that the 1000 series telescoped on impact. The National Transportation Safety Board told Metro to replace them or retrofit them to newer crash standards. Metro's answer? Retrofitting wasn't feasible, and the cars would stay in service until their scheduled replacement. In 2007, the Safety Board closed that recommendation with a phrase they do not use casually: unacceptable action. Then the signals. In 2005, near Roslyn Station, a Metro train had a near miss under almost identical circumstances. Out of it came a verification test, a check built specifically to catch a track circuit that had stopped seeing trains. Metro never made that test standard practice system-wide, and investigators stated it flatly. It would have found the faulty circuit before the crash. One more. In December of 2008, 6 months out, Metro's own Inspector General warned that the agency's safety department was chronically understaffed and undertrained. The NTSB adopted its final report on July 27, 2010. Probable cause: the track circuit failure. But look at the contributing factors. Metro's lack of a safety culture. Failure to monitor its own train control system. Ineffective oversight by its own board. Ineffective oversight by the Regional Tri-State Oversight Committee. And the Federal Transit Administration's lack of statutory authority to conduct federal safety oversight at all. Read that last one twice. In 2009, no federal agency had the legal power to regulate the safety of American subway systems. Airlines? Covered. Freight railroads? Covered. Subways moving millions of people a day? Nobody. The board also revealed that nearly half of Metro's roughly 3,000 track circuit modules could seriously malfunction, and that a quarter of the fleet gave riders almost no protection in a collision. So what changed? A lot, and painfully slowly. Automatic train operation was switched off within days. Humans took the controls, and they kept them for a very long time. Automatic operation didn't return to the red line until December of 2024. More than 15 years of operators manually driving every train in the system. 15 years to trust the equipment enough to let it drive again. The 1000 series cars were shoved into the middle of every train so they'd never sit on the front end again. Then they were scrapped outright. The last ones left service in the summer of 2017, replaced by the 7000 series, 41 years after they first rolled. The legal hole got filled too. In July of 2012, Congress passed a surface transportation law that finally handed the Federal Transit Administration real statutory authority over rail transit safety, and oversight of Metro got rebuilt from scratch. The FTA seized direct control of Metro safety oversight in 2015. Then, on March 18, 2019, it handed that power to a purpose-built body, the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission, with actual enforcement teeth, replacing the toothless committee the safety board had called out. That commission isn't decorative. It has yanked entire classes of railcar out of service. Metro can't even expand automatic operation to another line without its sign-off. 9 people got on a train home on a Monday afternoon. The entire purpose of an automatic train control system is to make that collision physically impossible. And it didn't fail because nobody knew. It failed because everybody knew. It was written down, and the paperwork just sat there. Over one of the busiest pieces of sky in America, nobody was in charge. Not a failure, not an oversight. That was the design. The Hudson River corridor is a slot of open air running straight down the middle of the river, right alongside Manhattan. Below about 1,100 feet, air traffic control doesn't sequence you, doesn't separate you, doesn't tell you what's out there. Pilots just fly. The rule is called see and avoid, and it means exactly what it sounds like. More than 200 aircraft passed within 3 miles of that spot on an average day. Saturday, August 8, 2009, 11:53 in the morning. Clear, bright, perfect flying weather. A Liberty helicopter's sightseeing flight lifted off from the West 30th Street heliport. Jeremy Clark, 32, at the controls. In the back, 5 Italian tourists, a family from the Bologna area, in New York on vacation, doing the one thing every visitor wants to do, see the skyline from above. Coming down the river behind them was a Piper single engine out of Teterboro. Stephen Altman, 60, flying. With him, his brother Daniel, 49, and Daniel's son Douglas, 16, a Pennsylvania family headed for Ocean City on the Jersey Shore. 2 ordinary trips. 1 good Saturday. And here's where it comes apart. As the Piper left Teterboro, the local controller was supposed to hand him off to Newark and warn him about traffic in his path. Instead, that controller was on a personal phone call, a conversation about a dead cat. Not a work call, not an emergency. The handoff went out late. And when the Newark controller tried to reach the Piper to warn him, nobody answered, because the pilot was still sitting on the frequency he'd never been told to leave. At about 1,100 feet, the Piper's right wing struck the helicopter. Both aircraft came apart in the air and fell into the Hudson. All 9 people aboard were killed. And it happened in front of everybody. That's the part people forget. This wasn't some remote hillside, midday above the busiest river in America, with both shorelines packed. Hundreds of witnesses on the piers in Hoboken and along the Manhattan waterfront. Bystanders filmed it on their phones. Boaters were on the water within minutes and found nothing they could do. Divers spent days pulling wreckage and bodies off the riverbed. The National Transportation Safety Board adopted its final report on September 14, 2010. 2 causes. The first was the controller's non-pertinent telephone conversation, which pulled him off his duties. The timely handoff, the traffic advisory. He lost his job. So did a supervisor who wasn't in the facility at the time. But the second cause is the bigger one, because it doesn't indict a man, it indicts a system. The safety board pointed straight at see and avoid itself. Think about what your eyes actually do. You catch motion, but an aircraft on a collision course with you doesn't move across your windshield. It sits in one spot and slowly gets bigger. No relative motion at all. It's the single hardest thing in the sky for a pilot to spot. And it's the exact geometry that kills people. Now add a helicopter climbing out of a heliport and a plane descending down the corridor. Both legal. Both precisely where they were allowed to be. Neither with any system on Earth telling them the other one existed. The board also faulted the FAA's procedures for transferring communications and its weak guidance for pilots flying that corridor. So the FAA moved. And give them credit, they moved fast. August 14th, 6 days after the crash, the FAA administrator chartered a New York airspace task force, controllers, the Controllers Union, and the pilots who actually fly that river every day. The report came back in under 3 weeks. The FAA announced the plan on September 2nd. The final rule took effect November 19, 2009. 3 months from wreckage to binding federal regulation. That is not normal government speed. What it did was turn a free-for-all into a structure. The corridor became a special flight rules area, and the airspace got sliced into layers by mission. Flying locally, sightseeing, hopping between heliports, you stay below 1,000 feet. Just passing through New York on your way somewhere else, you fly between 1,000 and 1,300. Same river, different floors. And the controlled airspace above it was standardized at 1,300 feet, so there's no more guessing where it starts. Then, every safety practice that used to be a polite suggestion became law. Monitor and broadcast on the common frequency. Announce yourself entering the corridor, aircraft type, position, direction, altitude, so everybody hears you coming. Anti-collision lights and landing lights on. Speed capped at 140 knots. Southbound, fly the west shore, northbound, the east shore. Opposing traffic now separated by an entire river. Carry the chart. Know the rules before you go in. The East River got locked down too. Closed to fixed-wing aircraft except seaplanes and flights specifically cleared by controllers. And pilots policed themselves outside the regulation. Safety seminars on flying that corridor pulled in hundreds of them in the months right after. 9 people. 5 were tourists who came to look at New York from the air. 3 were a father, an uncle, and a 16-year-old boy on their way to the beach. For decades, the plan for that airspace was that everybody would look out the window. For 3 seconds on a clear August morning, that was the entire safety system. And it worked. Right up until it didn't. Two weeks before this flood, Georgia was in a drought, a serious one, years long. Reservoirs down, watering bans on, states suing each other over who got the water. That's Georgia in the summer of 2009. Then it started raining, and it didn't stop for a week. The rain showed up on Tuesday, September 15th. It came in light, 0.04 of an inch at the Atlanta airport that first day. Nothing. You wouldn't reach for an umbrella, but it kept coming. Day after day, ground soaking up more than it could hold, and by the weekend, North Georgia was a sponge with nowhere left to put anything. Then Saturday the 19th, the sky opened. The Atlanta airport logged 3 7/10 inches from daybreak to 8 in the evening, more than double the previous record for that date. Outlying stations recorded 5 inches in 13 hours. And overnight into Monday the 21st, it peaked. Here's the number that stopped meteorologists cold. At the Douglas County Water and Sewer Authority, the 24-hour total from September 20th into the 21st came in at 21 3/100 inches. 21 inches. In a day. The odds of any spot in metro Atlanta seeing that much rain in a 24-hour window? Less than 1/100% in a given year. And here's why it turned lethal so fast. This is a metro area. Concrete, asphalt, parking lots, rooftops. Water that would sink into a forest floor has absolutely nowhere to go on a shopping center. It sheets off, fills the storm drains, overwhelms them, and then it takes the road. Creeks nobody in Atlanta has ever thought about became rivers in a matter of hours. 18 stream gauges across metro Atlanta recorded flooding beyond the 500-year level. Not a 500-year flood, worse than one. On Sweetwater Creek near Austell, just north of Interstate 20, the water crested more than 6 feet above that mark. On the Dog River in Douglas County, nearly 20 feet above it, 20 feet past a level that's supposed to turn up twice in 1,000 years. The Chattahoochee at Vinings hit its highest reading in 81 years. 28 gauges set all-time records, some going back to 1919. Sections of I-75, I-85, and I-20 shut down. Six Flags Over Georgia went completely underwater. Go look at the photographs of roller coasters standing in a lake. 21 high-hazard dams took damage. Hundreds of people were pulled out of their neighborhoods by boat. Now the hard part, and this one is different from most disasters. 10 people in Georgia died. Listen to how. 8 of them died in their cars, driving onto a road with water across it. 9 of the 10 died overnight, in the dark, when you can't see how deep it is or whether the pavement underneath is even still there. That's what makes this one so bitter. There was no wall of water hitting a town in its sleep. There were 10 people making one ordinary decision. I can make it through that. On roads they'd driven 1,000 times. 2 feet of moving water floats a car. 6 inches will take a grown adult off their feet. And at night, on a road you know, a flooded dip just looks like a puddle. The other 2 died because they didn't get out in time. Damage ran to $500 million, and officials say that's low because it leaves out debris removal. More than 20,000 homes and businesses damaged, nearly 17,000 residences, roughly 3,500 businesses. 17 Georgia counties received federal disaster declarations. Bridges washed out and had to be replaced outright. And one detail changed how people think about risk around here. A lot of the homes that flooded weren't in the mapped flood zone at all. Their owners had been told, effectively, that this couldn't happen to them. So what came out of it? The most permanent answer was also the bluntest. Some ground got taken out of play for good. Using federal mitigation money, Cobb County bought more than 75 homes in flood hazard areas, plus over 125 acres of vacant floodplain, not to rebuild on, to leave empty. In Sandy Springs, 3 destroyed homes came down, and the land became Windsor Meadows, a passive park. Drive near Sweetwater Creek today, and you'll still see empty lots with foundations growing over. That's the hardest lesson in flood management, and Georgia actually took it. Sometimes you don't rebuild. Sometimes you buy the house and give the creek its land back. The flood maps got a hard second look because 2009 proved that outside the mapped zone doesn't mean safe. The damaged dams went through the state safety program for inspection and repair, and the U.S. Geological Survey published a formal lessons learned review of how flood information actually reached people in real time, which fed straight into the stream gauge network forecasters and emergency managers depend on now. Warning language changed too, toward telling you what the water is about to do to you, instead of naming a river and a number. But the message that got hammered hardest is 4 words long, and it exists because of the 8 people who died in their cars. Turn around. Don't drown. The rain that ended Georgia's drought is the same rain that killed 10 people and did $500 million in damage. The state spent years praying for water. It got 1 week of it.